My name is Olivia Bennett, and for the past 7 years of my life, I've been slowly emptying out like a tree that looks strong on the outside, but is rotting on the inside. While my bank statements show an impressive financial trajectory, from aspiring analyst to senior consultant with a six-figure income, my emotional balance sheet tells a very different story. It's filled with endless withdrawals and almost no deposits. The mathematical impossibility of this emotional deficit finally became apparent to me Tuesday night at the Riverside Grill restaurant when my sister Rachel's palm connected with my cheek with such force that the sound echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot. That slap wasn't just about the Hawaiian vacation I refused to fund while babysitting her kids. It was the culmination of years of being valued only for what I could provide, but never for who I am. Have you ever realized that the very people who should love you unconditionally only turn to you when they need something? This revelation doesn't come in a single moment of clarity. It builds up slowly, check after check, ignored birthday after missed holiday, until one day, you're sitting in an expensive restaurant with a burning cheek and the sudden, crushing realization that all along you've been buying a fake version of familial love. I still remember my first loan. It was August, a hot, humid Michigan August 7 years ago. I had just been offered a junior analyst position at a consulting firm. Not that I was immediately rich, but for the first time in my life, I had a steady income, health insurance, and the safety cushion of a growing savings account. Rachel called in tears. Benjamin, then 3 years old, needed special orthopedic shoes, and their insurance refused to cover the cost. "We've already spent everything on rent this month," she sobbed. "I don't know what to do. The doctor says if we don't start corrections now, he could have a lifelong problem walking. $300. How could I deny that to my nephew? Of course I wired the money. Why not help if you can? I even insisted it was a gift, not a loan. But you know what's interesting about those shoes? I'd never seen them before. And when I cautiously asked about them a few months later, Rachel evasively replied that they didn't fit anymore. And then she immediately mentioned an overdue electric bill that needed to be paid right away. And so the pattern began. At first, it was true emergencies: a broken water heater, an unexpected doctor's bill, the need for a tutor for Lily. But soon the definition of emergency began to stretch. Mark's new interview clothes, a deposit for summer camp, a deposit on a new car because the old one looks unpresentable. Have you ever noticed how hard it is to notice gradual change? Like a frog in slowly heating water, I didn't realize how random requests turned into monthly financial obligations. By my 5th year, these loans had grown into regular financial support, totaling over $3,000 monthly in ongoing commitments, plus another $1,000 for occasional requests. Every time I hesitated to lend money, Rachel deployed a masterful, guilt-inducing tactic. "We're family, Liv," she said with that special note of frustration. "I'd do the same for you." But the truth is, she never did the same for me. When I was in a car accident and needed physical therapy that insurance didn't cover, Rachel was broke. When I celebrated a promotion, none of the family could make it. Rachel had a migraine. My mom had an important meeting at her book club. My accomplishments were always overshadowed by more pressing family dramas. Rachel's most effective weapons were her children: Benjamin and Lily, my nephew and niece, whom I genuinely loved. When my savings were dwindling and I was beginning to hint at financial constraints, Rachel would put the kids on the phone to ask if Aunt Olivia could help buy school supplies. "Hi, Aunt Olivia," 6-year-old Lily said in her little trembling voice. "Mommy said you could help me buy a new backpack for school. All the girls in class will laugh at me if I come with an old one." How could I say no to that voice? Especially knowing that saying no would be presented to the kids not as my financial constraint, but as proof that Aunt Olivia didn't like them. Over the years, my resentment grew along with the withdrawals. I began avoiding family gatherings that invariably ended with requests for money. I filtered the calls, felt physically nauseous when Rachel's name appeared on my phone, woke up every morning with a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't explain. I had achieved the professional success I dreamed of. I had a beautiful apartment overlooking the river. I could afford trips, good food, quality clothes, but the feeling of emptiness only grew. "You look tired," my coworker Jen remarked over lunch. "Is everything okay?" I almost told her. About how my brother and sister only come to me when they need something. About how my mom says, "You've always been the strongest," as an excuse for not being invited to family events unless there's a financial need. About how I feel like an ATM machine instead of a human being. But instead, I smiled and said, "Just a stressful project. It's not a big deal." Because admitting the problem out loud would mean admitting the bitter truth. I was continuing to provide financial support, partly for the sake of my beloved nephew and niece, but mostly because it had become the only way I felt valued by my family. I was buying affection that should have been given freely. "Next time," I promised myself after each transfer. "Next time, I'll say no." But next time always came with its own urgency, its own emotional blackmail. And I kept paying. The Hawaiian trap began during a family dinner my mother organized in honor of my birthday. Instead of a gift or even a card, I received an announcement from Rachel about plans for a 2-week vacation. "Mark and I are thinking of going to Hawaii next month," she said, as I blew out the candles on the cake I'd bought myself. "We've never been to a real tropical island." "That's wonderful," I replied, genuinely happy for them. "Are you all going?" "The kids will love it." She laughed as if I'd said something funny. "Oh no, just Mark and me. It's not a kids' trip. We need a little time to ourselves." Something in her tone made me tense up. I caught Mark's gaze across the table. He was suddenly very interested in the pattern on the tablecloth. "Sounds great," I repeated cautiously. "Do you have plans for who the kids will stay with?" Rachel brushed the question aside, as if it were an insignificant detail. "We're still working on it. Don't worry, we'll figure something out." 3 days later, they showed up at my apartment unannounced, with a bottle of cheap wine and strained smiles. I should have known they were up to something, but I invited them in anyway. After half an hour of awkward small talk, Rachel finally got down to business. "We thought it would be perfect if you watched the kids while we were in Hawaii." I blinked. "For 2 weeks?" "You know the kids better than anyone," Mark interjected. "They adore you." "And we thought it would be a great opportunity for you to spend time with them," Rachel added. "You always say you wish you could see them more often." That was true. I did want to spend more time with my nephew and niece, but 2 weeks of uninterrupted childcare while I worked full-time? That wasn't realistic. "I'm sorry, but I can't take 2 weeks off right now," I said. "I have an important project that—" "Oh, you don't need to take a vacation," Rachel interrupted. "They're old enough to go to school and classes. You just need to be with them in the evenings and on weekends." Before I could think of another reason to say no, Rachel moved on to the next part of her plan. "One more little thing," she said with that special smile I'd learned to fear. "We found an amazing deal on an all-inclusive resort package. $5,000 for 2 people for 2 weeks. It's truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." My stomach clenched as it came to me. "You want me to watch the kids for 2 weeks? And pay for your vacation?" "Don't say that," Rachel frowned. "We just thought you might be able to help. You always say family comes first. And you don't have to pay for everything," Mark added quickly. "Maybe just half? Or even a third?" I stared at them. These two adults with jobs and their own homes, who had come to me with completely serious faces to ask me to pay for their luxury vacations while I took care of their kids for free. "No." The word came out before I could think about it. "What?" Rachel looked genuinely shocked, as if the possibility of saying no had never occurred to her. I said no. "I can't take care of the kids for 2 weeks on my work schedule, and I won't pay for your vacation." The look of shock on Rachel's face was replaced by a familiar one. Hurt, accusing. "I can't believe how selfish you've become, Olivia. When was the last time you did anything for this family? When was the last time you thought about anyone but yourself?" That accusation, so divorced from reality that I couldn't even find the words to respond, was the first crack in the dam. The unspoken resentment of 7 years began to seep through my carefully constructed wall of self-control. Mark, sensing the approaching storm, tried to smooth things over. Maybe we should all meet for lunch this weekend? Discuss this calmly? He didn't realize he had already set in motion a chain of events that would lead to that very moment at the Riverside Grill. The moment when the physical manifestation of family expectation would not only leave a mark on my cheek, but open my eyes to the truth I had refused to see for so long. If you recognize yourself in this story, if you too feel like an invisible ATM for your loved ones, know that you are not alone, and that sometimes the hardest but necessary step to healing is to recognize that love doesn't have to have a price tag. Have you ever sat in a crowded restaurant and felt like all eyes are on you? Like you're an actor on stage, but no one bothered to give you a script? That's exactly how I felt that night at the Riverside Grill when my family staged an elaborate ambush under the guise of celebrating my promotion. It all started with a text from my mom. "Dinner at 7 at the Riverside Grill. We want to celebrate your success." I was touched by this initiative. Usually my professional accomplishments went by without any attention from my family. Perhaps, I thought with naive optimism, they were finally beginning to appreciate me, not just my bank account. I should have suspected something amiss when my mom insisted on the exact time and asked, "Don't be late. We've reserved a special table." Riverside Grill is the most expensive restaurant in downtown Grand Rapids, where we usually only went for really special occasions. But I was touched and, I admit, honored by their attention. As I entered the restaurant, I noticed them immediately. My entire family waiting at a strategically chosen round table in the very center of the room, surrounded by other diners. Rachel, Mark, Mom Eleanor, and even the kids, Lily and Benjamin, dressed in their best clothes. It was unusual to take the kids to such an expensive restaurant on a weeknight, but I pushed aside my doubts and smiled as I approached the table. "There's our finance star," Mom announced, rising for a hug that felt more like a pat on the back. "Thanks for organizing this. It's really nice," I said, taking the last available seat. Only then did I notice that the table was already laden with plates of expensive appetizers: salmon carpaccio, duck foie gras, tuna tartare. In the center stood a bucket of ice and a bottle of Veuve Clicquot champagne, which cost over $100. The waiter was just pouring everyone, including himself, a glass of grape juice. "We started without you," Rachel explained, sending a piece of tuna worth about $20 into her mouth. "The kids were hungry." I opened the menu and felt my stomach clench. Everything was even more expensive than I remembered. Steaks at $60, lobsters at market price, which must have been astronomical. "Aunt Olivia," 6-year-old Benjamin whispered, leaning across the table to me. "Mom said you're paying because you got a special work award." I froze, trying to keep my expression neutral. Of course she did. That's why this sudden interest in my promotion. That's why the unusually expensive restaurant and the orders without consulting me. "That's very nice of her," I replied, looking directly at Rachel, who was suddenly very interested in the contents of her glass. The waiter came over to take our orders. Rachel chose the filet mignon, Mark the lobster, and Mom the duck breast with truffle sauce. The kids got the kids' portions of pasta, which cost the same as an adult meal at a regular restaurant. "And for you?" the waiter asked, turning to me. "Just a salad, please," I said, choosing the cheapest dish on the menu. Not because I couldn't afford more, but because I suddenly lost my appetite. While we waited for the main courses, the conversation revolved around safe topics: the kids' school, my mom's new neighbor, a funny story about the mailman. I was almost starting to relax when Rachel tapped her glass with a spoon. "I have an announcement to make," she said, drawing the attention of not only our table, but the neighboring ones as well. "As you know, Mark and I are planning our trip to Hawaii next month, and I'm happy to announce that Olivia has agreed to watch the kids for those 2 weeks. You know that feeling when the blood drains from your face? When the room feels like it's spinning and the sounds become muffled?" I sat stunned by this outright lie, uttered with such conviction that for a moment I doubted my own memory. That's so generous of you, dear, Mom added, patting my hand. You know how much Rachel and Mark need this vacation. I looked at the faces around the table. Rachel smiling triumphantly, Mark avoiding my gaze, Mom radiating approval, and the kids clearly excited at the prospect of 2 weeks with their aunt. I never agreed to this, I said quietly but firmly. Rachel's smile twitched, but only for a second. Don't be ridiculous, Liv. We discussed this last week at your apartment. We did, I agreed, keeping my cool. And I clearly said no. Rachel laughed, but her eyes remained cold. You're always such a jokester, she said louder than necessary. Of course you said yes. We've already bought non-refundable tickets. This is it. That's why this whole spectacle. They'd already bought the tickets, counting on public pressure to make me give in. Surrounded by strangers, with the kids looking at me expectantly, I had to just smile and agree. I can't babysit for 2 weeks with my work schedule, I said, trying to speak calmly. And I wasn't agreeing to it. The atmosphere at the table became tense. Lily began to whimper, feeling uncomfortable. Mom threw me a warning look. Olivia, not here, she hissed. Rachel stood up, smiling strainedly at the people around her. Excuse us for a moment, she said, grabbing my hand. Sister talk. She practically dragged me through the restaurant to the women's restroom, an expensive space with marble sinks and fresh flowers. Luckily, we were alone. What the hell do you think you're doing? She hissed as soon as the door closed behind us. Are you trying to embarrass me in front of everyone? Me? My surprise was genuine. You publicly lied about me agreeing to something I clearly didn't agree to. That's the only way to get you to actually listen, she snapped at me. You always think only of yourself. You have no kids, no real commitment. You have no idea what it's like to be a real adult. I felt the anger that had been building up for years rise up inside me. I don't have kids, I repeated incredulously. Rachel, I'm practically helping you support your kids. Who pays for their private school, their summer camp, their health insurance? Who gave you the money for the down payment on the house? Oh, that's it. Her voice turned icy. You think you're better than us because you make more money. You think you can buy your way into a family, and then decide when we really need your help. It was such a distorted view of reality that I was speechless for a moment. Rachel, I finally said, it's not about money. It's about respect. You can't just announce that I agreed to something and expect me to play along. You know this is important to us, she insisted. If you really cared about the family. Stop it. I held up my hand. Just stop using family as a weapon. Real family doesn't manipulate. Real family doesn't lie. Real family respects boundaries. Her eyes flashed with a fury I've rarely seen. Who are you to tell me about real family? She hissed. You, who was always too busy with your precious career? You, who doesn't even show up for half of your kids' birthdays? You don't know anything about real family. I took a deep breath, realizing that we were living in parallel realities. I'm not babysitting for 2 weeks, Rachel, and I'm not paying for your vacation. That's my final word. I turned to leave when I felt a sudden movement of air. Then Rachel's palm connected with my cheek with such force that the sound echoed off the tiled walls. The impact was so sudden that I staggered, grabbing the edge of the sink for balance. My cheek burned. My ears were ringing. But most shocking was the look on Rachel's face in the mirror. Not remorse, not embarrassment, but cold righteousness. You deserve it, she said, chin raised in a stubborn gesture. Maybe this will set your mind right. With those words, she walked out, leaving me alone with a flaming cheek and the sudden clarity that comes with physical shock. At that moment, looking at my reflection in the mirror, I realized I had reached the point of no return. Years of financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and devaluation had led to this, a physical manifestation of what my family really thought of me. I was not a person with feelings and boundaries, but a resource to be made available on demand. Returning to the table on shaky legs, I found that our main courses had already arrived. Rachel sat calmly cutting her steak as if nothing had happened. The kids were hushed, sensing the tension. Mark avoided my gaze, staring at his plate. "What happened to your cheek, honey?" Mom asked, probably noticing the red mark from Rachel's hand. Before I could answer, Rachel shrugged. "A little sisterly disagreement." "She hit me," I said bluntly, not wanting to engage in any more pretense. Mom waved her hand like she was swatting away a fly. "Sisters are sisters. I remember you fighting over toys when you were little." Her willingness to attribute the physical abuse to sisterly behavior was the last straw. I looked at Mark, still avoiding my gaze, saying nothing in my defense. And in that moment, my realization crystallized. This wasn't family in any meaningful sense, just exploitation wrapped in blood ties. Without a dramatic statement, I simply gathered my things and got up from the table. "Where are you going?" Mom asked with a hint of annoyance. "We hadn't even started eating yet." "Home," I answered simply. "Don't be so sensitive," she said. "Sit down and eat your salad." "You can't just leave," Rachel said sharply. "You have to stay and discuss this like an adult." But I was already walking toward the exit, ignoring their voices behind me. In the car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, I felt strangely calm. The shock of the slap had passed, leaving behind a surprising clarity. That's enough. No more compromises, no more excuses, no more excuses. It was time to end the financial exploitation once and for all. You might think that in that moment I felt anger, resentment, or even a desire for revenge. But the truth is, the predominant feeling was relief. Relief that the mask was finally falling off, that the truth I had denied for so long was finally impossible to ignore. Sometimes it takes a physical shock to bring us out of the emotional stupor in which we have existed. For me, it was a slap in the restroom of an expensive restaurant, a slap that finally freed me from the chains I myself had helped forge over the years. If my story resonates with you, if you too are struggling with unhealthy family dynamics and financial boundaries, know that you are not alone. Give this video a like and subscribe to my channel to hear what happened next and how I began the process of breaking those toxic financial ties. In the comments, share your experience. Have you had a similar moment of epiphany? What was your breaking point? You know that feeling of emptiness when you make a decision you've been putting off for years? That strange mixture of numbness and crystal clarity? That night, coming back from the restaurant with a burning cheek and shattered illusions, I felt exactly that. My apartment greeted me with silence, a modern space with panoramic windows and minimalist decor that once seemed like a refuge. But this evening, for the first time, I noticed how little of it was personal. No family photos, no souvenirs from trips together, no homemade gifts from my nephews. Only expensive but impersonal furnishings, carefully chosen to create the image of a successful young professional. Instead of going to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and created a new document with a simple title: Financial Connections. I needed to see the full picture, not scrappy memories of transactions, but concrete numbers and facts. I started with the obvious: monthly automatic transfers. $1,200 for Rachel and Mark's mortgage, $500 for their utilities, $800 for Lily and Benjamin's private school. Then she moved on to a less conspicuous expense, a credit card, where Rachel was an authorized user for emergencies. The family cell phone plan, which for some reason only I paid for. Insurance policies for their cars, subscriptions to streaming services, wholesale club memberships, extra activities for the kids. With each row of the spreadsheet, the reality became more and more apparent. I wasn't just helping my family. I was actually supporting them by subsidizing a lifestyle they couldn't afford. When I finished and looked at the total at the bottom of the spreadsheet, I literally felt sick to my stomach. Over $40,000 in the last year. $40,000 is almost a third of my annual income after taxes, money that could have gone toward my retirement, toward a down payment on a house, toward a trip I'd dreamed of but kept putting off. Have you ever faced the truth and realized how deep into denial you had gone? In that moment, I realized that I was financially supporting not only my family's lifestyle, but also the illusion that this support would someday bring me what I really wanted: their unconditional love and acceptance. I didn't fall asleep until near morning, but I awoke with surprising clarity. While the coffee brewed, I called my financial counselor, Barbara, and asked for an urgent appointment. "Is something wrong, Olivia?" she asked when she heard the tension in my voice. "I need to completely restructure my finances," I replied. "Today." Barbara, a woman in her 50s with a sharp mind and an even sharper eye for financial matters, had always implied that my family's investments were unsustainable. Now she listened to my story without judgment, only occasionally nodding and making notes. "Well," she said when I'd finished, "do you realize this is going to be difficult? Not technically, we can close accounts and cancel authorizations in a couple of hours. But emotionally?" I nodded, feeling oddly calm. "I need a plan, a systematic approach. Together, we've developed a comprehensive three-phase strategy: immediate repeal of all optional payments, structured termination of current obligations, and legal protection of my assets going forward. It will be like ripping off a Band-Aid," Barbara warned. "Painful, but quick. Are you ready?" I thought about the slap, the cold righteousness in Rachel's eyes, the indifferent shrug of my mom's shoulders. More than ready. By noon, I'd methodically severed the most direct financial ties, removed Rachel as an authorized user of my credit card, a process that required just one phone call and identity verification, canceled all automatic transfers through the bank's mobile app, a series of decisive taps, each one feeling like a small release, contacted the children's school, explaining that I would continue to pay tuition until the end of the current semester, but no further, a conversation during which the administrative officer remained delicately silent, clearly catching the tension in my voice. Removed family cars from my insurance policy after a brief consultation with the agent, who mentioned that such changes happen more often than you think. Terminated the family cell phone plan, leaving myself with only one line. Each action was a small act of self-empowerment. Each severed financial line gave me back some of the control I'd been giving up drop by drop over the years. After lunch, I sat down to compose an email. This was perhaps the hardest part of the process, finding the right words to explain my actions without being overly emotional or accusatory. I wrote and deleted at least 5 versions before settling on a simple, factual statement. Rachel, Mark, Mom, I made the following changes to my financial affairs. Canceled all automatic transfers to your accounts. Removed Rachel as an authorized user of my credit card. Terminated the family cell phone plan. Removed your automobiles from my insurance policy. Notified my children's school that I will continue to pay tuition through the end of the current semester, through December 15th, but no further. After careful consideration, I have realized that our current financial relationship is unhealthy for all involved. This change will allow each of us to establish appropriate financial independence. Olivia. No apology, no explanation, no emotions, just facts and clear boundaries. Before I hit send, I took a deep breath, realizing that this was the point of no return. Then, with determination, I clicked the button, sending the email into the digital space and finally breaking the financial chains that had bound us together for so many years. But setting boundaries isn't just about severing old ties. It's also a defense against trying to rebuild them, and I knew my family wouldn't give up without a fight. I spent the rest of the day building a defense system. I changed my personal phone number, keeping the old one for work contacts only. Created email filters that automatically sorted emails from my family into a separate folder that I could check at will, rather than reacting to every notification. Adjusted the privacy settings on all social media sites, limiting the visibility of my posts to certain groups. Notified security at work that family members were not to be allowed in without prior authorization, a move that seemed dramatic but necessary given Rachel's temper tantrum. All of these practical steps to protect the boundaries I had finally established took hours of focused work. But with each small action, I could feel myself regaining control of my life. By the evening, I was emotionally and physically exhausted, but with a sense of accomplishment. I poured myself a glass of wine that I had long saved for a special occasion and sat by the window, looking out at the cityscape of Grand Rapids. The city lights twinkled in the twilight, reminding me of the thousands of lives running parallel, each with its own joys and complexities. Do you know what the strangest thing about setting healthy boundaries for the first time in your life is? It's both liberating and scary at the same time. In that moment, I didn't feel triumph or revenge, only quiet determination and a deep sadness that it had come to this. I thought about Lily and Benjamin, the innocent participants in this family drama. Would I be able to maintain a relationship with them without letting Rachel manipulate me through them? I didn't know. But I did know that I couldn't be a healthy adult in their lives while continuing to be a financial victim of their parents. My phone, the old number I hadn't yet disconnected, began to vibrate with furious insistence. Messages, calls, voicemails, emails, the first wave of family reactions to my act of independence. I didn't open any of them. Not now. Now was the moment for me. For a woman who had finally realized that her worth was not measured by the amount on a bank check she was willing to give away. For a woman who has begun the long road to regaining her financial and emotional integrity. Tomorrow will be plenty of time for the storm to blow over. Today, I enjoyed the unexpected calm that comes with making the right, albeit difficult, decision. If you've ever felt that your kindness is being used against you, that your support is being taken for granted, that your generosity has become an expectation rather than a gift, know that you are not alone, and that setting healthy boundaries is not selfishness. It's an act of self-preservation. You know that feeling when you're waiting for the inevitable storm? That tension in the air, that moment of calm when you realize it's about to begin. That's exactly how I felt for 24 hours after sending that email. I knew the family's reaction would not be long in coming. And it did come, predictable in its sequence, like a well-rehearsed play. The first act began with embarrassment and denial. A text from Rachel arrived Wednesday afternoon. Something is wrong with my card. It doesn't work at the grocery store. No questions as to why. Just an expectation that I fix the technical glitch. I didn't respond. 2 hours later, the tone changed. I was standing there with a cart full of groceries, and the card was declined. I had to leave everything and walk out. Do you realize how humiliating that is? Humiliating. Interesting word. Was it humiliating for her to hit me in front of everyone in the restaurant? Was it humiliating to live off me for years, without ever showing any real gratitude? By late afternoon, anger became the dominant note. The stream of messages built up like a tidal wave. Are you doing this to punish me? How can you be so petty? You're making Lily and Benjamin suffer. Ah, the children. Of course they came into the equation. The most powerful emotional weapon in Rachel's arsenal. Benjamin cried when he found out he couldn't go to soccer next semester. I hope you're happy. Those words were calculated to pierce my heart, to conjure up the image of my nephew crying, to make me feel like a monster. And I felt a prick of guilt, for a moment. Until I reminded myself that Rachel and Mark might well have been able to afford a soccer game for Benjamin if they'd adjusted their priorities. Maybe forgo an expensive vacation in Hawaii? On day 2, the strategy changed. Rachel moved on to public shaming. I didn't follow her social media directly, but mutual friends started forwarding me screenshots. It's hard when your successful sister abandons the family without warning. I don't know how we'll be able to afford food for the kids this month. Sophisticated lie. Rachel never mentioned how much she depended on my support in her public posts. To the outside world, she was a successful housewife with an enterprising husband whose children went to private school and pursued expensive hobbies. Now she was rewriting the narrative, portraying me as suddenly cruel and herself as a helpless victim. Mom took a more direct approach. On Thursday morning, around 10 o'clock, I received a call from our office secretary. Ms. Bennett, there's a woman here who claims to be your mother. She demands to see you immediately. I told her you were in a meeting, but she refuses to leave. I felt my stomach clench. Eleanor Bennett, always impeccably dressed, with perfect styling and an expression of perpetual displeasure, was making a scene in my office lobby. Thank you, Jenny. Please let her know that I'm unavailable and won't be available all day. If she refuses to leave, you may call security. Jenny later told me that her mom had to be escorted by 2 security guards to the exit while she ranted about ingratitude and family duty. Was it humiliating? Undoubtedly. But not for me anymore. When direct confrontation didn't work, the tactic shifted to bargaining. Rachel offered a compromise. We could shorten the trip to Hawaii to a long weekend. You wouldn't even have to babysit. As if the problem was the length of their vacation and not the very dynamics of our relationship. Mom sent an email suggesting a more reasonable solution. Honey, I understand that you are upset about what happened at the restaurant. Rachel shouldn't have raised her hand to you. But maybe you could reinstate at least monthly support until they get back on their feet. Family is family, after all. Even Mark got in on the act, calling me at work, on an old number I hadn't disconnected yet, with an awkward request for a one-time loan to help them transition to this new arrangement, as if their financial parasitization was some kind of business partnership that could be civilly terminated. I didn't respond to any of these suggestions. Barbara, my financial advisor, warned me. Any chink in your armor will be seen as an opportunity to go back to the old model. A complete break is the only way to set real boundaries. When bargaining failed, the most dramatic attempts at manipulation, medical emergencies, began. On Saturday night, I received a panicked text from Mark. Rachel is in the emergency room. Severe panic attack. Doctors say it's due to stress. Please call me back. I felt a prick of anxiety. What if this was true? What if my actions had really brought her to this state? After an hour of internal struggle, I decided to check the facts directly. I called the local hospital and asked about Rachel Clark's condition, my sister's maiden name, which she used in medical settings. We can't provide detailed information over the phone, but I can tell you that the patient was seen and discharged 2 hours ago, the nurse informed me. Discharged. Nothing serious then. That didn't stop Mark from sending 3 more messages about how doctors are concerned about her condition and how she may need hospitalization. A day later, it was Mom's turn. Her neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, with whom I've always had a warm relationship, called me with concern in her voice. Olivia, dear, your mother says her blood pressure has risen to dangerous levels because of a family conflict. She showed me some numbers. I think it's 240 over 120. I'm no expert, but that sounds scary. Really scary. And completely unreliable. If Mom had that kind of blood pressure, she'd be in the hospital threatening a stroke, not talking to a neighbor. I gently explained to Mrs. Peterson that maybe Mom was exaggerating, and if she was really concerned, she should call an ambulance instead of calling me. Oh, but she said an ambulance is the last thing she needs. She said that just talking to you might help. Of course. Because this wasn't a medical crisis, it was emotional blackmail. The final desperate measure came in the form of an email from Mark with the subject line, "Urgent Financial Crisis." In the email, he claimed that without my support, they would literally be homeless by the end of the month, and that the bank is threatening to foreclose on the house. I forwarded the letter to Barbara, who quickly refuted these claims. Based on the income you indicated for them, basic housing and transportation should be well within their means if they adjust their lifestyle expectations, she replied. Even assuming Mark earns at the lower end for his position, and Rachel doesn't work at all, they should still be able to afford a modest house or apartment. Not in the same neighborhood, maybe not with the same amount of square footage, but definitely not homelessness. This confirmed what I suspected. The problem wasn't the ability to provide for themselves, but an unwillingness to lower the standard of living they were used to at my expense. After 2 weeks, the intensity of the attacks began to diminish. The last message from Rachel was simple and sad. I never thought my own sister could do this to me. I almost replied. I almost wrote, and I never thought my own sister could use me financially for years and then hit me for refusing to pay for her vacation. But I held back, because I realized any response is renewed contact, and renewing contact is the first step to falling back into old patterns. Instead, I closed the messaging app and opened a new book I'd been meaning to read for a long time. The first step to building a life centered around my own wants and needs, not the endless demands of my family. You know what the hardest part about setting boundaries with loved ones? It's not their reaction, no matter how painful it may be. It's the internal struggle with years of programmed guilt, with the belief that your worth depends on how useful you are to others. Every time I doubted my decision, I went back to the feel of Rachel's palm on my cheek, the physical manifestation that my boundaries meant nothing to them, and every day it got a little easier. You know how sometimes life takes unexpected turns? 6 months after the day I severed my financial ties with my family, I sat in the Morning Dew Cafe, the neutral site where I had agreed to meet Rachel, nervously stirring my peppermint tea with a spoon. I wondered if I'd made the right decision in agreeing to this meeting. When the cafe door opened, I didn't immediately recognize the woman sliding onto the couch across from me. Gone were the designer clothes and chalky hair, replaced by simple jeans and a practical ponytail. But the most surprising change was the expression on her face, the lack of the arrogance I was so used to. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, folding her hands on the table with an unaccustomed uncertainty. "The last few months have been difficult, but necessary, I think." There was no accusation or manipulation in those words, just an unexpected sincerity that took me by surprise. I was expecting confrontation, and instead I got humility. During our cautious conversation, I learned that my family had been forced to completely reevaluate their situation. They moved to a smaller apartment in a less upscale neighborhood. Mark started moonlighting as a driver for a cab service on weekends. But the most amazing thing was that Rachel found a full-time job as an administrative assistant in a medical office, with a benefits package. "Turns out I have skills that are valuable in the job market," she said with a hint of self-irony. Who knew? I remembered the Rachel I used to know, a woman who believed she was meant to be a homemaker, whose children went to the best schools, wore the best clothes, and lived in a 4-bedroom house. A woman who thought work was something only those unlucky enough to have rich relatives did. "How are the kids?" I asked, because despite everything that had happened, Lily and Benjamin were still the part of the family I was truly worried about. "They're adjusting," Rachel answered. "It was hard at first. New school, less extracurriculars. But you know what? They're doing better than I expected. Better than I did," she added quietly. "We didn't become friends that day. There was no dramatic hug or tears of reconciliation. But there was something more meaningful, the first step toward a relationship based on equality, not financial dependence." After that meeting, I began to rebuild my relationship with my nephew and niece, not through money or expensive gifts, but through time and attention. I suggested a monthly weekend focused on experiences rather than material things. Have you ever noticed how children blossom when you are truly present with them? Lily, who always seemed shy and withdrawn, developed an unexpected enthusiasm for photography after I shared my camera with her during a visit to the botanical garden. By the time she was 10, she had an Instagram account, strictly moderated by Rachel, full of amazingly beautiful macro shots of flowers and insects. Benjamin, always the more active of the two, discovered his love of construction at a children's architecture workshop I took him to. Now his room was littered with models of buildings made from recycled materials, and he proudly told me that he wanted to be an architect, like Uncle Andrew. Ah, yes, Andrew. Another unexpected twist in my life. A landscape architect I met on a photography course I'd enrolled in when I suddenly discovered I had free evenings and money for a hobby. He was tall, with thoughtful eyes, and a habit of touching plants as he walked past them, as if saying hello to old friends. He listened to my story without judgment, seeing it not as drama, but as a necessary process of growth. Like pruning a tree, he said, sometimes you have to remove diseased branches so the whole plant can thrive. As the anniversary of that confrontation at the restaurant approached, I realized how much I had changed, not just in my relationship with my family, but in every aspect of my life. I had built genuine friendships, not superficial connections with coworkers, but true friendships based on shared interests and mutual support. I was thriving at work, having been promoted to senior consultant, now managing my own team. And I was finally planning that trip to Bali that I'd been dreaming of for years, but kept putting off because of family commitments. The most significant change was my attitude towards money. They were no longer a tool to buy love or approval. Now it was simply a resource. Important, deserving of respectful treatment, but not determinative of my worth or relationship with others. The relationship with my mom proved the most difficult to rebuild. Unlike Rachel, she never fully acknowledged her role in the unhealthy family dynamics. Our interactions remained formal, limited to family gatherings on special occasions. But even that was progress. The boundaries I had set were now being honored, albeit with noticeable tension. The last time we all got together, on Benjamin's 8th birthday, I watched my family from a new perspective. Rachel, more relaxed and confident in her new role as a working mom. Mark, finally accepting responsibility for his family's financial well-being rather than shifting it to me. Children growing up with a more realistic understanding of the value of money and labor. Family relationships will never be what I once envisioned them to be, warm, supportive, and uncomplicated. But they have evolved into something more realistic. Imperfect bonds between imperfect people, governed by clear boundaries and mutual respect. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and others is to draw a line, even if it hurts. Because true love is not built on dependency or exploitation. It's built on the freedom to be yourself, with all your flaws and limitations. That Tuesday at the Riverside Grill changed the trajectory of my life. But the slap that echoed through the restaurant wasn't the end. It was the beginning, a painful but necessary awakening that allowed me to finally break free from my role as the family ATM and begin to truly live my life. If you've ever felt like me, stuck in a cycle of financial exploitation, valued only for what you can give, know that change is possible. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen without pain. But on the other side of that pain awaits a freedom you may not even be able to imagine. And that freedom is worth every difficult conversation, every boundary set, every moment of doubt. Because in the end, the price of family doesn't have to include losing yourself